Hi, Carrie.
How are you?
Very well. How are you?
I'm good.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. It's greatly appreciated considering we've this is literally the first time we've spoken.
It's funny how social media works.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, definitely. Um,
Exactly.
so obviously I don't want to steal too much of your time, so we'll kind of dive straight into the topic of today, which is obviously
Okay.
PCOS.
Hmm.
Um, I know you mentioned in the emails how it was quite a uh, an interesting and one of your some more favorite topics. So is there any background behind your fondness for PCOS or just for functional medicine, which I think you're kind of going through that journey at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah. With PCOS, my fondness started because once I realized it's not always ovarian, um, testosterone is made in the adrenals as well. It's made in the fat tissue, and I found that so many women were getting diagnosed or really struggling with PCOS, but they were thin. They didn't have any insulin issues, and it turns out, in our stressed out society, that all that stress, all that upregulation of the HPA can really pump out testosterone and give women very similar symptoms. And so it was just this big awakening for me, like, oh, PCOS is not always what we traditionally thought it was. It's a spectrum. And so that's why I started really getting into the research more and trying to lecture about it. I'm not an expert. I mean, like PCOS is not the only thing I do, but that's what got me
Absolutely.
more into it.
Okay. Yeah, and you kind of
Yeah.
dive straight in there because I was going to ask you around when you go onto a lot of the conventional medicine websites in the UK, like maybe the NHS, they talk about, I guess, the traditional view still of PCOS in regards to two of three symptoms being present, a
Yep.
lack of the cycle, elevated testosterone, and maybe some insulin resistance.
Yep,
Um,
which is still true. I mean, that's all true, but you can have lack of a cycle from um, high stress. You can have um, some of the other high androgen symptoms, and it can be adrenal related as opposed to ovarian related, or it could be a mix. You might have ovarian issues and adrenal issues.
and what kind of
We keep freezing.
oh, are we
There.
back?
Yeah,
Okay. Um, and do you see clients at the moment, or is it more sort of research based in education now?
I do. I'm the full-time medical director for Dutch, so I don't. I'm on a sabbatical from seeing clients, so I do a lot of education and a lot of consultation all over the world.
Okay, because obviously, yeah, I imagine therefore you see an awful lot of Dutch results.
Thousands. Yes, thousands.
So, with that kind of experience, what is there? Are you able to give any kind of percentages of how many of these results you view as being more adrenal based compared to ovarian? Is that something you can answer?
Unfortunately, you can't because you can't tag a testosterone to find out if it comes from the ovary or if it comes from the adrenals.
Okay.
So we kind of extrapolate if the cortisol is elevated and they seem to have a really upregulated HPA, then and their testosterone's high and they have a lot of PCOS type symptoms, then I sort of assume like, hey, getting your adrenals under control is a big part of our treatment plan.
Okay. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting because I think, as you say, there's this other aspect that isn't discussed as much. And then when you dive into the literature, you see papers around the gut microbiome in PCOS and the thyroid in PCOS
Oh yeah.
and nutrients as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, I think one of the reasons why I love functional medicine is how you can use that functional medicine model in the web to start understanding in the individual where do we need to go.
Right.
So yeah, it's a beautiful model. Um, I guess with your experience then, looking at sort of these results and just your own knowledge of PCOS and how it may fit in with other hormonal imbalances, what are some of the key things from an intervention perspective that we might want to consider if we have someone coming to us, therefore, with PCOS?
Well, if it's true insulin based PCOS, then obviously diet is a huge component. Diet and exercise. So insulin resistance is a big part of the traditional PCOS everybody knows about. And so working with weightlifting, especially high intensity training, to help counterbalance that insulin resistance, that blood sugar dysregulation. Diet is a huge part, stress management. So just basically, just all those lifestyle things that we're like, yeah, we know, like whatever. And I'm like, no, really. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, I understand there's supplements. People will take berberine, they'll take an inositol, they'll take some of these chromium, zinc. They'll take things that are PCOS supportive, but if they don't change anything, like the supplements can only do so much. And so it really is the basics when it's real, sort of that traditional PCOS. Now, when it's more adrenal PCOS, we're looking at stress management and sleep and circadian rhythm. I'm doing that sort of stuff with them.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think the circadian rhythm thing is a really interesting component of all of this as well.
It's so cool. Yeah. And again, right, it's so simple. Like, everyone knows we're supposed to go to sleep at night, we're supposed to be up during the day, but I mean, all of our cells have little circadian clocks in them, and it's just so critical. And the circadian rhythm set by the pineal gland sets all our rhythms. So even our reproductive rhythm, which I don't think women realize, if you're not sleeping and you don't have a normal circadian rhythm, I bet you don't have a normal reproductive rhythm as well.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in regards to, I guess, moving that forward, we've mentioned if there's a traditional insulin resistance concept or model, then we need to be talking about dietary and some of these basic lifestyle things. Similar if it's adrenal. Is there anything that we can expand on from maybe sort of a testosterone perspective, and maybe diving into some of the markers in the Dutch test, if convenient, to expand on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Things like 5-alpha reductase. So a lot of women will make testosterone, whether it's normal or high, but if it goes down the alpha pathway, the 5-alpha reductase pathway, that's when women get all those crazy symptoms that they hate, right? Like the chin hair. No woman wants chin hair, and the hair on the upper lip, and hair around her nipples and on her belly, and she gets cystic acne, and she gets mood swings like anger and irritation, and she's not pleasant to be around. And so those sort of like high androgen symptoms are what we think of with PCOS. They're very classic, but lots of women hear me say that, and they're like, wait, I have that. I have lots of chin hair, and I have cystic acne, and I'm moody all the time. I'm like, we should probably evaluate where your testosterone goes, which is great about the Dutch test, is I can tell them, yep, it's going down the alpha pathway, and there's absolutely things we can do to modify that, get you back on the right track.
Yeah. So can you I think I mentioned in an email, but we have, in regards to our listeners, we've got sort of a mixture of the general public, personal trainers, and nutritional therapists. So are we able just to expand a little bit on this idea of the 5-alpha, 5-beta pathway and the significance of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when your body makes a hormone, it has to go somewhere. So it goes down various pathways. And so when it comes to testosterone can go multiple ways. In fact, testosterone can make estrogen. But testosterone can also go down these two pathways. One is the alpha pathway, and one is the beta pathway. And the alpha pathway is that dominant pathway. It's the acne, it's the facial hair, it's the anger and the irritation. Whereas the beta pathway is less so. I mean, it's still androgenic, it's still testosterone influenced, but it's much calmer, much more relaxed, much less hair, that kind of stuff. And so when women go down the alpha pathway, they get all these symptoms that they don't like. It's what drives them to the doctor's office or the practitioner's office, and they say, why am I breaking out all the time? Why am I angry and moody? Why do I have all this hair on my face or around my nipple? And even though this subject is on women today, men get enlarged prostate, and they get male pattern baldness, and they also get angry and irritated and moody. The pathway, it's the same.
Sure.
And so what's interesting is genetically you can favor that alpha pathway, but you can push it. You can push it as well. So you can push it with, like, the more stress you're under, the more inflammation you have, the worse your blood sugar and insulin is. And so a PCOS woman who's already struggling with insulin and blood sugar will just make this pathway worse. And so by helping to correct her blood sugar and insulin, helping to lower or affect her stress, helping to reduce her inflammation, just from lifestyle, can really help immensely.
Interesting.
There's supplements that help too. There's supplements and medications. A lot of people are familiar. There's sort of hair block medications. A common one is called spironolactone, and it's a androgen receptor blocker, and so it helps. So women who are losing their hair, having acne, their doctor might prescribe that. But on a natural front, we have more natural things that can help shift you from the alpha, maybe more to the beta.
Okay. So if anyone's listening and they're kind of thinking, oh my God, I'm going down this 5-alpha pathway. Apart from the lifestyle components that you've just mentioned around obviously managing our stress and our blood sugar management, you just mentioned that there might be some natural sort of supplements or nutrients products that can be supportive and obviously supplement those lifestyle interventions. So what would some examples of those be?
Funny enough, they're all the same supplements that we would use for a man with an enlarged prostate. So if people, obviously I encourage people to talk to their practitioner, but if they start looking at these supplements and they see that it's in a bottle of something called prostate support or prostate health, women go, I don't have a prostate. Like, I know, I just need the stuff inside. So the big ones are saw palmetto. Another big one is stinging nettle root. The nutrient zinc is a good one. EGCG, which is from green tea. Reishi mushroom is a really potent one. There's another one called Pygeum or Pygeum africanum. So you'll see in these prostate blends, you'll see saw palmetto, which is like SAW, saw palmetto, and you'll see nettle root. I'm starting to see reishi mushroom more and more just because mushrooms are getting so much research, which is awesome, and they can be really helpful for people.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and I want to clarify too, because women will say, "Oh, I have chin hair." I'm like, no, I don't mean like the one. We get that one annoying chin hair, right? And you have to pluck it out. I'm talking like, PCOS. They have a lot of hair. They're considering shaving or electrolysis, or they're plucking routinely, and they're getting it here. They're getting it like on their sideburn type area and maybe down their neck. And so it's substantial hair. It's not just the annoying hair that women can get just for being female.
Right. And yeah, that's actually a really key point, I guess. My fiance is continually going on about this one hair she has. So that's good to clarify.
Yeah, fiance probably doesn't have PCOS. It's just the female chin hair that we all freaking get.
Right. Yeah, I think, and again, the significance of the topic is pretty profound. It's thought 1 in 5 women in the UK have PCOS. So there's a huge number of people who I guess need a little bit of education about what are the signs and the symptoms that might, I guess, just get you going to your practitioner and helping with their experience and insights about exploring a little bit more.
Right, and you mentioned earlier, like 2 out of 3 for a diagnosis, and that's really key. So it's called the Rotterdam criteria, the 2003 Rotterdam criteria. And what they said was you have to have, it's PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. So if you have multiple cysts on ovaries, if you get an ultrasound, that's 1. 2 is to have high levels of testosterone, DHEA, DHT. Those are called your androgen hormones, and the symptoms that go with them: acne, facial hair, anger, irritation. And 3, you have cycle problems. So you have no cycle. You have irregular cycles, you don't ovulate, you can't get pregnant. So you have to have 2 of 3 of those. You don't have to have the cystic ovaries on ultrasound. So despite the name, polycystic ovary syndrome, you don't have to have that. So that's why it's really interesting when you look at the big picture. You can have hair loss from a lot of things: high stress, thyroid problems, low iron, other nutrient deficiencies, right? You can have missed cycles and not ovulate for other hormonal issues, thyroid, stress, right? Like sort of overlaps. Gut issues, inflammation. The body will turn away from reproduction to focus on all that inflammation. And so sometimes PCOS is diagnosed because you fit the 2 out of 3, but you're actually missing the big picture. And other times I think it's diagnosed correctly. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You've got this sort of metabolic endocrine hormone thing going on, and we need to address it. But the other, so you don't have to have the multiple cysts on ovaries.
That's interesting.
If it's there, it's pretty telling.
Okay.
And the cysts on ovaries too, it's not just one, because lots of women have had one. Lots of women have had an ultrasound and they're told, you have a cyst. This is multiple. This is, 9, 10, 12, 15s, little tiny cysts on the ovaries.
Yeah, and it's interesting, everything you've mentioned so far around how we intervene and support the individual who might have that diagnosis, that we go back to these fundamental lifestyle interventions. And I've actually recorded, this is my 3rd podcast that I'm recording today, but there's already a very clear trend, which obviously we expected, and it's something that we thought would happen, but it comes back to these concepts. And the conversation so far has definitely been around how we need to lighten the load, I think was what Tanya said. And this idea of if we can just take some of these stressors away, whether that is related to day-to-day stressors or whether that's actually more of a physiological stressor like a bacterial overgrowth or something, we can improve a lot of these different labels or diagnoses with very similar interventions. Would you agree with that?
100%. There's this really cute cartoon. I wish I knew who drew it. And it says we're all basically houseplants. We need some water. We need fresh light, right? We need some exposure to darkness. We need some nutrients. And, talk to us and let us grow. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly. We're all like houseplants. We need some, regular basic care. And we're not doing that anymore as a society. We're not sleeping. We're on our phones all the time. We're not communicating with each other. I mean, we're texting. We're Snapchatting, we're Instagramming, but we're not, the conversations at dinner, you go to dinner and you see so many families just on their phones now. The stress, just like you said, the stress from bugs and bacteria we pick up, the stress from our life, our relationships, the stress from the chemicals, the chemicals in our environment is ridiculous. The foods we choose to eat, I mean, it's amazing our poor bodies can get out of bed in the morning, and handle it every day. And I totally agree with you. I think if we just covered some of these basics, lighten the load, I love that a lot of this stuff would get better. I may not go away completely, but man, if you could get a 50% reduction just by the basics, that's pretty amazing. Most men and women would take it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. It's this concept of lightening the loads. I find liberating as a practitioner, and at the same time sort of empowering, because I know that I've got some go-tos really with every client that's coming to me, and I can trust that they're going to have some sort of improvement by applying those principles of lifestyle medicine. And I just like the idea that the body's got a innate ability to rehabilitate and repair given the chance and the right environment. And all of those things are just facilitating that, really.
It's like a houseplant, right? You have a houseplant that you've neglected and you're like, oh crap, and you start watering it again and you put it back in the sun, you give it some nutrients. What does your houseplant do? It thrives, super happy. So we just have to stop neglecting ourselves as humans. Everybody, maybe myself included, I still have practitioner friends that are like, are you forgetting to do this? Like, yes, I'm totally not doing that. You just get busy and you get sidetracked and you forget.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think passion, sometimes there's a real balance to be had and an awareness around being passionate about what you do and giving yourself those opportunities to recover and not read the next paper or whatever it may be.
No, and don't you find when you read the next paper that it still comes back to the same thing? Like, I'm a why person. I want to know the why. Why is there so much testosterone? What cells in the adrenal glands make it? What cells in the ovaries make it? Why does all this overconversion to estrogen happen? But the treatment's always the same. So I know the why, but still, the basic lifestyle stuff and maybe some supplements thrown in to help move it along.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, taking that just broader perspective of what's going on in some of the other systems apart from hormonally is just such a powerful part of this process as well. I know that I remember the first paper I read. It was I think it was in medical hypothesis. So obviously it's something that we need to appreciate is a hypothesis, but it makes complete mechanistic sense, which was around a bacterial imbalance inducing leaky guts, leading to an inflammatory profile, which then might drive insulin resistance and then influence PCOS ultimately. So again, we go back to the gut being sometimes a cornerstone of what we want to be supporting as well.
Oh yeah, I was at the IFM at the Institute for Functional Medicine conference, and Dr. Datis Karazian was talking about molecular mimicry in the gut, where you eat a food and the food is supposed to break down into single individual amino acids, like a single amino acid. And what happens is we don't have the stomach acid and we don't have the enzymes and we don't chew our food. We just inhale it. And so it doesn't get totally broken down. Instead of one, you get a sequence, and the body doesn't like the sequence, so it attacks it. And the sequence might look like something bad, so the body attacks it in the gut. And now you have this potential kickoff for autoimmune or inflammation or what have you. And Dr. Karazian goes, I used to blow off digestive enzymes and stomach acid. He goes, turns out it's actually really important. And so he was like, you guys, get your stomach acid healthy. Take your digestive enzymes. Do bitters when you eat, do bitter herbs. Chew your freaking food. And I was like, yes, what are fundamentals? You chew your food and you have healthy stomach acid and you're not taking proton pump inhibitors or Tums at every meal. You're getting it corrected, and you break your foods down to the single amino acid, and your immune system is way happier. Mm-hmm. It starts with chewing. How simple is that?
Drop the mic, Gary, I think right now.
Now, does that mean that I chew my food all the time? No, I have to consciously be like, chew my food.
No, but I mean, it is so true. And I mean, I had a client on Friday. She came in for weight loss support, but fundamental things just weren't being done. She has an hour opportunity for her lunch, but she eats it as quickly as possible at her desk, and she just hadn't really connected the dots that if that's happening on a daily basis, and she also had gastrointestinal symptoms, that actually, let's not overcomplicate this. We need to start developing some boundaries around your lunch break. So our initial tips were go to the canteen, give yourself half an hour, maybe not the full hour, but let's just start to build some healthier habits and self-care. And I think it's too easy in some ways for us to forget these things. And I've certainly been guilty of it in the past. I think often we like to geek out, and we like to make things almost complex from a physiological perspective. But one of the things I'm really trying to achieve with the podcast is, let's dive into some of the cool science at times, but rein it back with what are the actual takeaway messages for clients to be doing. And that stress management, blood sugar control, sleep, the circadian rhythm is just going to be really that I can probably record a little conclusion and just use it for every episode.
Just run it on a loop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Funny that your client who came in, I see that with a lot of PCOS women because they'll eat on the fly, eat fast, which puts them in fight or flight, so they're not rusting and digesting. It upsets their bacterial imbalance, their gut bacteria, and then they actually have a hard time processing their estrogen because they now have gut bacteria that are making more of an enzyme called Beta-glucuronidase, right? So it starts from the beginning. They're not chewing. They're eating on the fly very quickly. Their gut is upset. The bacteria are upset. So they make more of this enzyme, and this enzyme lets your estrogen recirculate. So estrogen that was packaged up in a gift with a little bow on top and sent through your intestines has now had the bow untied and the lid removed, and it floats free, and you reabsorb it. And so PCOS women often say, I have estrogen dominant symptoms. If I get PMS, or I'm having trouble losing weight, I have breast tenderness, I'm moody, I have heavy periods, and oh, by the way, I have a lot of gut symptoms. I have digestive problems, gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, what have you. And I'll say, yeah, because it's not your ovaries' fault. Your gut bacteria are mad, and they're making this enzyme that's making you reabsorb your estrogens that you thought you were getting rid of. So you're just recycling your estrogen again. If we can get you chewing and digesting and slowing down and improve your gut bacteria by whatever means, your estrogen will decrease. They're just like this big, it's a big circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something actually that I see relatively common, this beta-glucuronidase enzyme in stool testing being elevated. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this question, but something I've sometimes said to clients, partly through my lack of not necessarily understanding, but certainly awareness, is to what degree can this enterohepatic recirculation impact hormonal health? So that in sort of isolation, is it profound enough for it to be a big factor, so to speak?
Yeah, it can be. In fact, there's a study, which I can send you the link. There's a study where they put radio-labeled. That would be bad. They did radio-labeled estrogen in women, not mice, not rats, but in women, and they found, they did a percent, like they put in 100%, and then how much came out in the stool and how much got recirculated, and it was a significant percent that got recirculated. And they found these women had really, really high levels of beta-glucuronidase. And so I would not want to be a woman who volunteered for the study to have radio-labeled estrogen put in me, but it really helped me understand this is pretty significant for women and estrogen dominance, and not just PCOS, right? With estrogen dominant symptoms in general, women and men too. Men can absolutely have the same issue and have high estrogen. Women with endometriosis, women with fibroids, women with adenomyosis, breast cancer risk. I mean, it's pretty impactful, the gut bacteria on estrogen.
Interesting. And I'm just thinking out loud, but from an autoimmune perspective, when we think of estrogen's potential role in modulating immunity, etc., there must be some sort of mechanism from that perspective where it can get involved.
I'm assuming as much.
Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you for that. I've got a client that I'm thinking of at the moment, and her thyroid antibodies came back positive. She'd been diagnosed hypothyroid, but she hadn't been diagnosed Hashimoto's at that point. And her beta-glucuronidase is really high. So one of our initial points, obviously, was just trying to improve gastrointestinal health.
Yep, absolutely.
Brilliant.
Absolutely. Yeah, so there you go. Beta-glucuronidase, which is good. I mean, we need some of it. It helps with complex carbs, and it helps with flavonoids. And we don't want it zero, but when it gets out of control, it's very high, then that's when we have a problem.
Yeah. And are you aware of what other hormones get involved in this recycling? Because it's not just estrogen or testosterone, right?
It's not. So the hormone that takes the S off of things, steroid sulfatase, can also be increased in gut bacteria. There's no traditional stool test yet, but I read about it in the research. Research is doing it, and so that will increase things like DHEA. It'll take the S off of estrone sulfate, and so estrone is your E1 as opposed to estradiol is your E2. And so estrone can recirculate. And so, yeah, there's other mechanisms that the gut bacteria will cause several of your sex hormones to recirculate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at some of those Dutch results, and you're seeing some of these pictures or these states, I assume then we can start to consider, is there value in going and doing something like a gut test to explore these mechanisms, really?
We ask a lot. A lot of practitioners automatically run a Dutch test, and they'll do stool testing. Of course, if gut symptoms intestinal symptoms aren't the primary concern, then not. But I mean, so many people present with intestinal concerns. and everything starts with the gut. So they'll often run both at the same time. So practitioners are calling me or emailing me saying they have all these things showed up on their stool test, and here are their Dutch results. And I'm like, yep, let's put it together.
Brilliant.
I see that. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
For sure.
And for our the practitioners that are listening, I'm sure they would love to just hear you speak a little bit around the Dutch test and maybe how it differs from some of the traditional testing that also the general public may have had and are kind of thinking, what on earth are they talking about with Dutch testing?
What is this Dutch test? I'm not Dutch. Right, so it's funny enough, it's an acronym. It stands for Dried Urine Test for Comprehensive Hormone. So DUTCH. We do not test for Dutch heritage. It's just an acronym. But it's we call it a dried urine test, which means clients and patients urinate on these strips of filter paper. They're very small, and you let them air dry for 24 hours and mail them back to the lab. So it's very different from people who are used to having their blood drawn, or maybe those who've even done saliva testing where they spit in a tube or put a cotton swab in their mouth. And so the reason the test was created was because you can get your traditional hormones out of saliva or serum. You can get your estrogen, you can get your progesterone, your testosterone. But that's kind of it. Like you can't get, where does it go? And so with urine, you can get all the pathways. So what pathways has it gone down? So for estrogen, you catch your phase 1 pathways and your phase 2 pathways. And by phase 1 and phase 2, I mean, obviously detoxification. And then with testosterone, you get your alpha pathway and your beta pathway. And so you just get more information out of urine testing than you would for serum or saliva, which is how this idea was created and caught on. Because people were like, well, her estrogen is normal or her testosterone is normal, but she has all these symptoms, or even he has all these symptoms. And then when we look at the pathways, when we peel back the layers of the onion, we're like, oh, here's the problem. Going down the wrong pathway, and we need to fix it. We need to mitigate it, stop it, reroute it. And that's why it's nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it really fits in with the functional medicine model. They have that sort of acronym of PTSD. So when we're thinking of hormonal health, is it a production issue? Is it a transport issue? Is it a sensitivity issue at sort of the cellular level and the receptors there? Or is it a detoxification issue? And I sometimes replace the detoxification because of the thoughts that come with it to sort of metabolism. And obviously the Dutch test, I think, is beautiful at showing us not just the production, but certainly the metabolism of these hormones down those pathways. And as you say, it just gives a whole new picture of what's going on.
Right. And especially like estrogen's a great example, since we've been talking about estrogen. Your body makes an estrogen, and then when it's done with it, it has to go somewhere. So it first goes through phase 1 detoxification, and then it gets put back out in circulation, and then it goes through phase 2 circulation, or detoxification, where it's made water soluble, and then actually it goes through phase 3 detoxification, where it's moved from the inside of the cell to the outside of the cell, so you can get rid of it. But phase 1 detoxification has pathways within it. So there's 3 pathway options. One of the pathways is considered the healthier pathway. We call it the 2 pathway. The 4 pathway is the more potentially cancer-causing, and the 16 pathway is what we call a proliferative pathway. So it makes things grow. Good for bones, bad for breast tissue, bad for heavy periods. And so we have women that will say, I got my blood drawn, my estrogen is normal, but I have very heavy periods, and around my period at PMS, my breasts get really large and they hurt. What's going on? And we'll see, oh my gosh, you favor the 16 pathway. Or, oh my gosh, your phase 1 detoxification's really slow, and so it's building up in a sense. Or maybe their phase 2 is slow. And so you can't get estrogen, out of the body, and it just recirculates and recirculates and recirculates. But as the metabolite, as the phase 1 metabolite. And so the traditional testing, the traditional serum testing, if it's not high or low, but yet you're very symptomatic, this is where clients get into frustration because they're told they're normal, and they're not normal. They're full of symptoms. There's something going on, and that's why the Dutch test is nice. You peel back the onion and go, all right, here's where the problems are. Here's what the pathways are doing, the metabolism.
Yeah, I think I've certainly found it incredibly valuable with some of my clients. And again, if you have the opportunity to align it with a stool test or even maybe a blood chemistry test to look at inflammatory markers, etc., it's just another way of us thinking about peeling back that onion, as you say. And obviously the beauty, or an additional beauty with the Dutch test, is around some of these organic acid markers that have been introduced over the last few months. So would you mind just expanding on some of those, and I guess the reasoning and thinking behind why we've added them to a hormone test?
Yeah, exactly. So we've added 6 organic acid markers, and they're very hormone specific. So we're not looking to become the next greatest organic acid company. But when you're trying to make a decision as a practitioner, then it's nice to have more information. So the 6 organic acid markers we chose, one is B12, a B12 marker. One is a B6 marker. One is for glutathione. One is a dopamine metabolite, like the neurotransmitter dopamine. One is a norepinephrine, or adrenaline marker, and then a serotonin marker. And so when you're working with hormones, it's really nice to know, is my estrogen not detoxifying because I don't have enough B12 and B6? You just can turn the page and go, nope, I have B12 and B6, or yes, I need B12 or B6. When women have PMS, depression, anxiety, lack of motivation, addiction, and they think it's hormone, it's nice to have the snapshot of the dopamine metabolite, the adrenaline metabolite, the serotonin metabolite, to go, oh, yep, actually, maybe it's sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, but maybe it's some of these brain chemistry hormones as well that are making it worse, with making your PMS worse, or making your mood worse, or making your motivation worse. And so we can pull them together to get a much more comprehensive treatment plan for people.
Interesting. Okay. And do you have any research as, I guess, part of the Dutch labs, Precision Analytical and things, around urinary neurotransmitter metabolites and what they're representing? Because I've just seen a little bit of debate about, are they giving us information just more about systemically? Does it give us indication into sort of neurological health, if I use that term?
Right. So we don't test neurotransmitters. So we're not, like, for example, I'm not testing serotonin at the Dutch lab. What we're testing is the metabolite, which is called 5-HIAA, which is a really big word. Hydroxyandrolycylic acid. And so what happens is when you make serotonin, whether in your brain or in your gut, like eventually the serotonin in your brain will come through the blood-brain barrier, but it gets metabolized. And so a part of the serotonin marker is partly central or from the brain. Now, how much of that percentage? I have no idea, unfortunately, which is, so with organic acids, I'm very gray area about it. I'm never black and white for people. If the 5-HIAA is low, I never say, oh, you need serotonin, because it takes a lot to make 5-HIAA. It goes through several steps. It requires some coenzymes. It requires certain SNPs. It needs your MAO enzyme to work. I want to look at melatonin, as well. If your melatonin is normal, then I'm like, well, it's probably not serotonin, because if melatonin looks good, then your serotonin is probably fine, because it's tryptophan makes serotonin, makes melatonin. But if your melatonin's low, then I might be more suspect. And you have depression, I might be more suspect. Like, hey, I bet you have a tryptophan or even a serotonin issue, 5-HTP problem, and work backwards from there. So it's not a pinpoint test. It's definitely a very broad test of, hey, you need to look other places. Just cast your net wider. Is it serotonin? Is it a coenzyme? Is it a SNP? What are you looking at? And obviously take symptoms into consideration. If the serotonin marker's low and depression is not their thing, it's probably not serotonin.
Right.
Right. It's probably something else.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And certainly something I see, I've done a lot of organic acid testing using the one test from Genova, for example. And there seems to be a very strong correlation between elevations in the serotonin metabolites and bacterial dysbiosis. And that would, I think, make sense. And again, this is me just speculating a little bit, but if we're saying that so much of our serotonin is produced and stored within the gut, then it makes sense that urinary metabolites of serotonin may be elevated as a result of that. So maybe it's another marker that kind of nudges us towards stool testing if we haven't done it simultaneously.
Right, exactly. And unfortunately, with the organic acids, they're very food influenced.
Right.
So most all the companies, Great Plains, Genova, us, we have a food to avoid list because you may be a little bit high because you accidentally ate a serotonin food that day and weren't even thinking about it. And a lot of people are taking supplements with tryptophan, or they're taking amino acid blends, they're taking 5-HTP, they're taking something that, or they're taking a depression medication, and so their levels will be elevated because, of course, they're supplementing. Should be.
Yeah.
We take that into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's brilliant. And what's your perspective on PCOS just within the context of inflammation? I certainly know there are some papers that kind of talk about it just being a systemic inflammatory condition ultimately.
Well, and if you think just about the basics of PCOS, I mean, if it's either an insulin thing or an HPA, an adrenal thing, and what makes insulin worse? Inflammation. And what surefires up the HPA axis? Inflammation. And what pushes you down that 5-alpha pathway, giving you the acne and the facial hair and the moodiness? Inflammation. So even with the traditional sense, you're just going to worsen all your pathways when you have a lot of inflammation going on, whether it's in your gut, the food you're eating, the things you're using, it can do it, I think.
Yeah, it's, as you say, it certainly makes complete sense and fits with all of these different pathways that we're mentioning. And it takes us back to those fundamentals of thinking about gut health, stress, and as you say, diet as well as what is the source of that inflammation.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't realize they're inflamed. I'm sure you have clients that you get better and they're like, wow, I didn't realize I was so bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a good point. And I'm sure I read a paper once talking about how as a species, humans just are really bad at that kind of thing. Basically, that we very quickly forget how bad we were, or we just don't realize because maybe the symptom came on over a few years and we just so slowly, progressively deteriorated that we just aren't aware of it. But yeah, it's definitely a common factor where people go, wow, this is what it's like to be healthy.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think a lot of conventional medicine, because they don't have the time. I'm not bashing conventional medicine. It's just when you have 9 minutes, that's hard. It's hard to get a complete case and diet, lifestyle, stress, symptoms, an exam. I mean, everything in 9 minutes. And I think a lot of people get brushed off. Like, oh, that's expected in menopause, or oh, well, you just had a baby, so that's pretty normal, or there's always sort of an excuse. Oh, well, you're in university, like that's what happens, and it's like, well, okay, maybe, but there's stuff we can do.
Yeah.
And then when it lasts 10 years, it's like, well, now the baby's 10, so I don't think that's
And I think I've had a client who literally was told to come back in 6 months because their markers will probably be out of range and then they can start treatment.
I hear that with thyroid and it drives me nuts.
Yeah.
All the time. You're like, oh, your thyroid's borderline, so why don't you come back and then we'll see.
Yeah. It is. It's just a strange mentality, but obviously conventional medicine to a degree, and again, I'm not trying to bash it either, but from this sort of perspective, it's reactionary. It's dealing with, or is brilliant at dealing with acute care, but a lot of these lifestyle components, it just doesn't have the system in place to cope.
Right. It's an overwhelmed system. I mean, both there and here, even in the United States, it's a very overwhelmed system. There are a lot of very sick people trying. And
yeah.
You can't see 30, 40 people in a day and touch on all the important stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's a really good reason for us to start exploring more. I think group therapy and group sessions just to try and to deliver the education to the public, because obviously I think that's ultimately what we need to do a better job of as an industry, which is just get some good user-friendly information out there that with a little bit of context people can start to actually understand, okay, well, this is an easy thing that I can start to change from a behavioral perspective.
Right. And podcasts like yours.
That is the aim. That is the aim. I guess if we were trying to summarize a lot of what we've gone through, Carrie, are there any case studies that sort of come to mind, or even a case study that comes to mind to show how this all can fit together?
Yeah, I actually this is what sort of triggered it all for me, is I had a case, I had a woman who was in her 30s, and she had 2 kids, she was getting her PhD, and she was married, very high stress, and the last 6 months, her menstrual cycles were becoming irregular. She was losing hair, she was having some acne. She went to her doctor, and her doctor said, you have all the signs and symptoms, you have PCOS. And she thought, I'm in my 30s, like, really? I've had normal cycles, I had my kids, no problem, are you sure? And they said, yep, you have 2 out of 3, you have PCOS. So she came to see me, and I thought, wow, this sounds not right. In the last 6 months, these changes have happened. You are in a very tough PhD program. You're a mom of 2 little kids. Her husband travels a lot. I mean, it just seemed more situational lifestyle than that was reflecting in her hormones. So when we did her testing, I did Dutch testing with, and she was having digestive. She was having intestinal stuff. So I did a stool test on her, and I did Dutch testing on her, and her blood sugar and insulin were perfect. That wasn't it at all. But her cortisol markers were very elevated. Her testosterone was elevated. She was going down that alpha pathway. And in her stool testing, she had a whole lot of candida and sort of dysbiosis stuff. And so that is the case that really got me into, well, it's not the ovaries. Like, well, what else could it be? So, and that like pulled it together for me. Like, okay, she has all this gut inflammation, which is driving inflammation. She's high stress. She's in a PhD program. Her husband's gone a lot. She's got 2 kids. She's trying to keep it all together. She's an alpha female going down the alpha pathway. Like, that makes sense. So we just worked to temper it. I said, I don't think you have PCOS. You have all the symptoms, but not the diagnosis. And it took time for, she wasn't going to leave her PhD program, and she couldn't, get rid of the kids. So we had to do things to keep her head above water, work on stress management. We did adaptogenic herbs to try to help her, in the morning, and we did calming herbs to help her sleep at night. We did a sort of a gut healing protocol to help lower inflammation, get rid of the candida, improve her microbiome. And within a couple months, she'd lost some weight, her cycles were back to normal, her skin was getting way better, she felt better, and I was like, yeah, it's not PCOS. This is definitely mimicking. It's definitely much more inflammation, adrenal, in her case.
Right.
Obviously I have cases of PCOS where it's very insulin related. I have a university student whose insulin was very elevated, and her leptin, which we didn't talk about, but leptin is a hormone released from fat tissue, and it has to do with our hunger, helps with hunger and fat release. Her leptin was elevated, and so she was a very traditional case of PCOS. And she had high testosterone because her insulin was high, and so we addressed hers completely differently. Hers wasn't gut. I mean, she had stress, but hers was an insulin issue and a leptin issue, so we went a different route for her. So it's 2 very distinct cases and 2 very different and distinct treatments, and so it's important to know the difference.
Yeah, and I think that's a great overview and insight into how you treat the individual, not the diagnosis or the label. And I had a similar conversation earlier today about sometimes, and again in my history, I sometimes think I've done this in the past, where I've almost been assisting the client chase the diagnosis, when actually, do we really need to, when we think about lightening the load and how much impact it can have on so many different aspects of health, from gut health to hormonal health, etc. So I think that again ties in with everything that's coming out, speaking to you, all you practitioners, and researchers, etc., which is there's more than one way to support someone, especially when we're taking this complementary approach to medicine and health.
Right.
Interesting. And I've just remembered, Carrie, that we did get 4 questions. A whole 4 questions. You got the most questions out of anyone so far. And I know one actually, a couple of people asked, which was around, are there any functional medicine blood markers that you might look at or see that could indicate PCOS or might get you, exploring it more to confirm?
So you don't have to do a Dutch test. I'm 100% biased because that's my company. But if you're just starting out and your doctor runs blood tests on you, if you have elevated testosterone levels in the blood, if you have elevated insulin, so they'll do if that's done fasting along with blood sugar. Sometimes you have to ask for that though. Not a lot of conventional doctors will run a fasting insulin. And then it goes with the symptoms. Other markers that show up often are maybe a higher estradiol, which is E2, a lower progesterone level. We'll see estrogen and progesterone are not necessarily diagnostic of PCOS, but you often will see it in the symptom picture. And then symptoms, like I said, so if your testosterone is high in the blood and you have acne or facial hair or body hair you're not thrilled with, you're losing hair in your head, you're angry and impatient, then okay, that's one marker you can check off. And then if you have irregular cycles, not ovulating, trouble with fertility, your progesterone is low in the blood, that's another one you can check off. And then if your doctor sends you for an ultrasound and you have multiple cysts, that's when you can check off. So those are like the classic key blood markers for PCOS.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And another question, do you have time? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So another question was, what are the long-term consequences of amenorrhea in athletes?
Oh, that's a good question. The big one is bone. So when you have amenorrhea, you don't have a cycle. So you're not getting the up-down fluctuation of estrogen and progesterone. And so a lot of these athletes will develop stress fractures, bone fractures, osteoporosis, osteopenia, which is just the step before osteoporosis. But estrogen, we vilify estrogen. The estrogen is actually really important for things like our skin, our brain, our blood markers, cholesterol markers. I mean, estrogen is really, really, really helpful for stuff like that. Progesterone is our calming, relaxing, soothing, everything's going to be okay hormone. And so I tend to see a lot of these athletes who are more anxious. They're the type A. They're the go-getters. And so when they don't have all that progesterone to help with sleep and calming, they're prone more to anxiety and insomnia issues. And so it's really important for women to get a cycle, I think, because it'll protect your bone health, it'll protect your brain health, your skin, your mood. So it really affects a lot of things. And women they'll skip a cycle here and there. If you miss one cycle or two cycles, no big deal. But these athletes who are missing them for months, sometimes years at a time, it can be pretty detrimental.
Okay. That's really useful information. I think I certainly see progesterone low in bloods so often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
really
it's
common. And
yeah.
like I said, women, it's our progestation hormone. And so, and not even professional athletes. I'll have like women who are just extreme sportists. So they like CrossFit, or they marathon, or they triathlete on the regular, and then they can't figure out why they can't get pregnant, and they can't figure out why their memory isn't as great as it used to be, or they feel more stressed than they used to be, or they're not sleeping as well as they used to. And I'm like, hello. Unfortunately, I mean, I get it. I get this. You like to CrossFit, or you like to triathlete, or you like to marathon, but when we run their hormones either in blood or on Dutch, like it's not a pretty picture, and it's affecting you as a woman, and you need to knock it off. I had a woman who was a marathoner. She ran a marathon, or half marathon or marathon every weekend, and she couldn't figure out why she couldn't get pregnant. And so once she stopped running marathons, within about 3-4 months, she was pregnant.
Wow.
I mean, it's like she wasn't getting a cycle. It wasn't very regular. She was putting her into fight or flight often when you're running. So when she stopped, she was able to get pregnant.
Yeah.
Obviously, this isn't for I'm not saying this is concrete advice for every single person. There are definitely women who are going to listen and go, I triathlete and I got pregnant. Like, absolutely, girl, you did. But for the women who don't, like, we're looking for the why. We're trying in that person, maybe that extreme sportist is not a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that context of knowing, is this person running half a marathon every weekend and working 12-hour days and not eating enough calories, etc. It's all these things have an accumulation factor to them, obviously, I think, as well.
I agree.
Awesome. Okay, and then I have two final questions, if that's okay. One is I think relatively basic, which is if someone's feeling good but hormones in testing are still not optimal or in the normal range, do you leave it or continue with some form of treatment to try and optimize, lab data ultimately?
It depends on which hormone is not optimal. So, for example, with women, when we do hormone testing on them, whether you do it in blood or in Dutch, you do it in the second half of your cycle, day 19, 20, 21 of a 28-day cycle. That's what you are. And so the ovaries, your right ovary and your left ovary, they're sisters, not twins, which means they don't have to, by law, do the same thing every month. So some women alternate. Righty goes 1 month, lefty goes the next month, back and forth. Other women are dominant. They're maybe very right dominant. They feel ovulation out of the right side. And then 6 months in, they get this weird period and like the left side had gone, And so they're like, what the heck was that? I'm like, well, it must be the other ovary. So sometimes when people test, I ask them, what are your cycles like? Are they the same, consistent every month? Do they vary? Do you have normal consistency? And like sometimes randomly you get a weirdo. Is it like 1 month is good and the next month is not great? Because when you test and the levels don't look great, if you're on a bad month or an off month or the naughty ovary, that sister ovary, then that may make the difference. So if you're like, I feel good most of the time, but that month was kind of off for me, it's like, well, it's probably just the other ovary, and that's not your dominant ovary, so you're probably fine. And so I sort of take that into context. Other things like cortisol is a big one. Your cortisol can change by the minute. So if you get your cortisol drawn and it doesn't look good, maybe it's really low through the day, and people go, well, I'm not tired, I feel really good. Sometimes they're telling the truth, and sometimes, when you dig a little harder, they're like, well, actually, when I sit down, I could probably fall asleep, or I have to push myself to go all day, or well, I hop up on caffeine, I drink caffeine all day to keep going otherwise. I'm like, well, okay, so yes, we need to do something about it. And other times it was just situational. They'll say, well, I generally feel really good, and unfortunately when I took the test, I was just getting over a cold, or I just done a bunch of travel for work, but it was the right time, so I took the test. Or, it's like, all right, then it's situational. We probably don't have to do anything about it because you were reacting to the situation at the time, and then you lucky enough, recovered, and you feel good most of the time. So it's not a black and white answer. I do ask a lot more questions, and it does depend on the marker, and some markers are silent. Somebody goes, I feel really good all the time, and their blood sugar's really high and their insulin, I'm like, I'm still going to do something about that.
Sure.
If they say I feel really good, and yet one of their on the Dutch test, there's a DNA damage marker called 8-OHDG, and if I see that really high, I'm like, well, DNA are pretty quiet, so I would expect you probably to still feel good, but I don't like that your DNA are getting damaged, so let's address this. So it depends if it's a silent marker or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's always the thing and the answer when we're talking about laboratory results and information is the context of that individual from a symptom life story perspective obviously is what really allows us to interpret that result with any degree of accuracy ultimately.
Right. And sometimes it's mind over matter. I'm sure you have had clients. I have a patient who has an extremely high sex drive, and yet her hormones are normal to low end. And she says, it's just, I just, in my mind, like, I just mind over matter. Like, I want a high sex drive, and I'm going to have a high sex drive. And I was like, can we bottle that up? I think a lot of women can use that. And in her case, I mean, I couldn't point to a single hormone to say, oh, this is why your sex drive is so high. It's in her persona, her being, she just forces a high sex drive.
Right.
Which is great. I mean, I was like, I'm not going to do anything about it. Go, get it. So, yeah, it's definitely very individual.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned around when you dive deeper and start understanding a little bit more about people from a stress perspective and an energy sort of fatigue perspective, what comes up, i.e., as you say, are they using caffeine and they're not really appreciating that they're needing to use caffeine? But I still remember a conversation, and it's happened a few times now, really, where I've encouraged the client to focus more on how they feel and make decisions based on how they feel, not rather than, for example, eating what they think they should eat, eating what they feel like eating, etc. And the number of times where people have come back and actually said, Alex, by kind of leaning more towards this question, I've realized that actually what I feel like doing is sleeping a lot more. And they just haven't been aware of what their body's been trying to tell them ultimately. Mm-hmm. It is interesting.
Because nobody wants to admit that they want to sleep more or take a nap. It's easy to say, it's easy to feel tired, and then you go find a pick-me-up. You go get some chocolate, you go get a coffee, you go get a snack, when really what you need to do is close your eyes for 20 minutes and power down.
Yeah, and I also think there is an identity aspect to this. I was listening to a podcast, I think sometime last week, and it was on sleep, and I must apologize to the interviewee because I can't remember his name, but he was basically saying that there's an identity and almost a self-esteem component to this, which is a lot of us like to say that we're surviving off 6 hours sleep and we're still going. People almost feel ashamed by saying, I slept 12 hours last night, it was amazing. So again, there's this society aspect of actually what are our assumptions and beliefs around sleep and self-care. And we have guilt about sitting down and having that 20-minute nap in the afternoon. So there's always that emotional mindset perspective of it, which I'm always interested in.
And on the flip to that, if the people who are proud of hustling, right? How many times do you ask somebody, "Oh, how are things going?" They're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so busy. I'm just so busy," and they're proud of it. I mean, it's their badge of honor, right? I have no time for anything, and I've got all this stuff going on, and I'm just so stressed out. And well, that's not good.
Right.
That's not a good badge of honor. At the end of that, you get no trophy for that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I can be very honest there, and I look back at times in my 20s whereby I think there was just this automatic answer of, I'm just so busy. And there were times when I wasn't even that busy. And it wasn't that I was deliberately trying to lie, I don't think. It was a matter of this is what people say now. And I think that's how automatic it's become, just to be busy and not do the self-reflection and the thinking that we need to do to have that balance there. But before we go down a different rabbit hole, there's one final question, which was, what do you think about fertility awareness methods in detecting first signs of PCOS or other endocrine imbalances?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a number of women who, especially the cycle irregularity, not ovulating, can't get pregnant. When they do fertility awareness, they definitely key right in and can tell I'm not ovulating, or I ovulate really late and then my period starts, so my window is very short. It's called luteal or luteal phase defect, when you have a very short second half of your cycle. And so, yeah, I have a number of patients who figured it out that way, that there's a problem.
Brilliant. And I guess
Not absolute for PCOS, but it's very helpful.
yeah, another layer of information, shall we say. Brilliant. I think that wraps it up quite nicely, Carrie.
We've had quite a conversation.
Thank you so much for coming on. I know there are a lot of people super excited to hear you. So this will be, I'll let you know obviously when this is being shared, but there's definite excitement for this episode.
Yay, I'm so glad to hear that.
And am I right in saying that you're coming to the UK later in the year?
In October. I will be there in October for the Gestational Summit. Yeah.
Brilliant. So I guess just to, in case practitioners aren't aware, do you just want to do a little pitch of what this is?
Yes, it's through Regeneris, as you say, Regeneris Laboratories. And so they're hosting a 2-day event in October. You can go to their website, and it's all about fertility, pre-fertility, getting pregnant, postpartum depression, PCOS. Dr. Felicia Gersh is talking about PCOS, which I'm very excited about, and nutrition. So I'm actually talking about testing, fertility testing. So when do you do what, when with your patient, when they're new to fertility, when they've been trying for a while, let's not forget our men. You know, a lot of men get left out of the fertility thing. They're 50% of the equation, so can't forget them. So it's really neat. The lineup is fantastic. And so check out Regeneris and sign up to come in October.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Carrie. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I'm a big fan, and for those listening, obviously you're very prominent really on Instagram. So you do some great educational posts. So if people are interested in learning more, then I would certainly recommend them heading on to Instagram and checking you out there as well.
That's my favorite. I'm a very visual person, so I like Instagram.
Yeah, me too. Brilliant. All right, Carrie. Well, thank you very much once again. I'm hoping to see you in person in October. So I'll come and be a little groupie. And yeah, thank you for one final time.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Carrie.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Excellent. Yay.
Recorded that, right?
Yeah, so I use Call Recorder on Skype. So it's useful because it
No recorder thing came up, and I was like, I hope he knows what he's doing.
No, it records at both ends, which is great. So it takes away sometimes a bit of echo, etc. So hopefully it means we've got two good tracks, basically, and I can then edit on GarageBand.
Okay.
So I'm waiting for iTunes to just kind of approve the podcast, and that can take 2 weeks, but normally it's a few days, apparently. So this will be going live probably over the next couple of weeks, really. But I'll let you know.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome.
Cool.
Alrighty. Well, I'll let you be.
Thank you, you too, and I really appreciate it. This is a lot of fun, and I'm excited to see how your podcast grows and explodes.
Fingers crossed. Excellent.
For sure.
All right. Thanks, Carrie.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.